Hello, this week on Graham's Ark we're in the Durham countryside at a small village near the North Yorkshire border. And my reason for being here is to introduce you to animal expert Wincy Willis. Wincy, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
What a smashing cottage. Why did you choose to live out here in the country?
We used to live in the town. We've always been ever so keen on animals. Thought it would be nice to stop upsetting the neighbours and get away from it all and have the peace and tranquility that the country affords and have plenty of space to keep all the kinds of animals that I've got, birds, tortoises, terrapins, etc.
Think we could have a look at the terrapins?
Yeah, why not?
It's a smashing terrapin tank, Wincy. Where do the terrapins come from that are kept in there?
The European pond terrapins, they come from the Mediterranean countries, and the red-eared terrapins from the Americas.
Do they live in water all the time?
Most of the time, but they do need to have access to land to lay their eggs and to bask in the sunshine.
Now, if, say, someone wanted to keep one as a pet, where would you get one from?
The pet shop. Most of the terrapins that you see on sale now, the tiny ones about so big, and they're red-eared hatchlings, and they're actually commercially bred for that purpose. Years ago they used to be caught in the wild in the Louisiana bayous, but now they're actually factory farmed, literally, and they're sent over in the hundreds, most of them ending up in a horrible fate, but that's the way to get one, from a pet shop.
How much would it cost to buy one?
Usually I think they're between £1.25 and £1.50.
Now, what would we do to look after it? Obviously, there's a lot of care involved, in fact, more than most people think.
Oh yes,
looking
definitely.
after a terrapin. How would we keep it healthy?
There are several points to bear in mind. The main thing, especially with a young terrapin, which you're likely to buy if you're buying one in a pet shop, is temperature. It only grows and matures properly at a temperature of between 75 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the first critical thing. The other thing is access to natural sunlight. Now what happens is, you know, when we go out and sunbathe, we feel really good afterwards unless you get burnt. It stimulates your sort of skin and everything feels great. And this is what happens with a terrapin. It builds up vitamin D and they grow hard shells and good strong bones. So here, living in the north, it's quite difficult. What I do, I've got a fiberglass pond in the garden and it's empty, and as soon as the sun shines I dash out and put lots of lukewarm water in it and put the terrapins out and little logs for them to get out onto and let them sunbathe, literally. And when they're not out in the garden in the natural sunlight, they're in a heated tank, not as big as this obviously for the young ones, but a tank that I can really control the environment in. And then of course food. The main thing is a variety.
Do you really need a pond outside?
Not a pond, no, you can put any sort of container outside as long as there isn't a barrier between the sun and the terrapin. So you don't want, sun through glass is not effective. It's got to be straight, direct sunlight. You know, yourself, if you're in a greenhouse, for example, you won't get sunburnt the same way as you would if you were standing outside.
What about someone that lives in a flat then?
Well, you can get a window open and get a shallow dish hanging out of the window to get the sunlight, but of course usually when you live in a flat you're either at one side of the building or the other, and it limits you to where your sunshine comes from. And of course there are bulbs now, special bulbs, that simulate natural sunlight. They're terribly expensive, but they are effective. So if you really wanted to go into it and do it properly and you were living in a flat and didn't have access to natural sunlight, you could buy one of these bulbs.
Well, let's start from scratch. What would we need to keep terrapins in?
A tank. A tank's the best thing, preferably made out of glass, because if you make it out of plastic, the terrapin's claws grow and they scratch, and it's really, really difficult to keep clean. Whereas glass, you can scrub it with a pan scrubber or something like that and keep it nice and clean. I prefer tanks with this sort of plastic edging, because then it's less dangerous. If you're carrying it around, you're not going to damage it, because if it's just made of glass, you can chip the edges very easily. So basically a tank like this. The bigger the better, because...
Approximate size?
Well, you can start off with a tank of about 2 feet long, but I would say get the biggest one you can possibly afford, because the terrapins grow very quickly and you'll soon have to change it. So get the biggest one you can afford. And
it's okay, sure, is it, if it's very big for one of the small terrapins?
Oh, the bigger the better. The bigger the tank is, the quicker they'll grow as long as you're feeding them properly, because they'll exercise more, they'll feed more, and they'll expand with the tank. So yes, absolutely, bigger the better.
Right, and to go in the tank?
Right, well, there's an assortment of things. I prefer to keep the tank very, very basic. You see fancy displays of tanks with lots of plants and rocks and gravel in, with tropical fish, and people think that's what they should do for terrapins. Well, I wouldn't, because terrapins are very, very messy creatures. When they feed, they spread their food all over the place, and it gets absolutely filthy. So keep it a basic glass tank, and then you can empty it totally and scrub it clean when you need to. So you've got the basic glass tank, and all you need in it is some form of platform that the terrapins can get out onto to bask under the lamp. So the best thing to use, I find, is a rock. Now, this is the sort of rock that I use. This is very hard rock. It's not porous. The water doesn't soak into it, and you can scrub it clean. Now, the sort of rock not to use is this type, sandstone. That absorbs the water, and in the end it builds up smells and all the germs get in there, and it creates a terrible mess. So that's the sort of rock not to use. Use hard rock, scrub it thoroughly, make sure it's absolutely clean, and then you can build up a little sort of wall of them so the terrapins can get out onto dry land. Now that's all you need. If you want to put wood in, this is cork bark, which you can buy in pet shops to put in tropical fish tanks.
Does that float?
And this will float. It'll float for an awful long time, and they can get out onto this. But I find this has been in the tank for a week without being cleaned, and it's very, very messy. So unless you're prepared to really keep on top of it, keeping it as clean as possible, I would avoid this.
Right.
So rocks in the bottom. Another thing that you can buy in pet shops is this sort of thing, which is slate. Now, it looks very nice, but it's very, very sharp. And I've found on a couple of occasions that small terrapins fighting over a worm or something have gone up to the edge of this and actually cut themselves. So I've stopped using this altogether now. So smooth, round rocks that you can scrub nice and clean.
Right.
And obviously another thing about the rocks is when they're climbing up onto the rocks, they're scratching against it and their claws get worn down, so it's much better.
Right, then we fill it up with water, obviously.
Yes.
How full?
Don't fill it right up. I would say in a tank like this, you would fill it no more than half full.
Right.
Okay, so you've got it half full, you've got your island of rocks. Now you've got to keep the water warm, particularly for small terrapins. Now the best way to do that is with one of these. This is an ordinary heater thermostat that you buy in a pet shop to put in a tropical aquarium. When you buy it, it should be set at around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will do. You don't need to twiddle about with it, that'll do. It's fine.
Just going back to what you put in the tank, do you need any gravel in the bottom of it?
No, absolutely not.
Just those basics?
Basics, because if you start putting things in the bottom, they collect bits of food and mess, and it ends up smelling very quickly, and you create problems. You don't need them. The terrapin's quite happy as long as it's got water to swim in and land to get out onto.
Now, when you've put the water into the tank, obviously you've got to let it warm up before you put
Oh
the
yes,
terrapins
yes.
in.
Well, for a start, you would test your heater and thermostat. You would put this in, switch everything on, and then leave it for a day. And check the temperature. Keep coming back, making sure that the temperature stays right. And the thermostat will switch itself on and off according to the exterior temperature of the tank. Now, if you want to use less electricity, which is obviously important now, I would get some polystyrene tiles, you know, the sort that you put on the roof,
Yeah.
on your ceiling,
Yeah.
and stick them round three sides of the tank. Paint them with some green poster paint or something on the inside so that it doesn't look too awful. And then stick them round three sides of the tank, and that'll keep a lot of the heat in.
Right.
Now, also, obviously, you need a top on it. Now, this is a small one here. I've just got this to show you. This one wouldn't obviously go on this tank, but it's easier to handle, right? This is just an ordinary fish tank lid. You buy them, again, when you buy the tank at the same time. And I've got connected in here just an ordinary light bulb.
Right.
Not the clear kind, the pearly kind.
Why?
The clear kind are too glaring. They tend to be quite harsh. I always use the pearly kind. They seem to take to it easier. Now that is your source of light to attract your terrapins out to bask under. But it's not the same as sunlight. Sunlight is the important thing. We've discussed this, how absolutely critical it is for sunlight. Now, on the market now is a bulb. This is it, and it's called a true light. And this reproduces sunlight exactly. So it's very expensive, This is why I've got this one attached to a cable and I move it round from one tank to another. Because if I kept it in one tank, if I had to have one in every tank, I just wouldn't be able to afford it.
About how much are they?
They're about £5. But they do last a long time. And if you're doing something, I think you should do it properly. And if you can't get your terrapins out into natural sunlight, then this is the thing to do. Now, it's important to have it as close to the terrapins as possible. So don't, have it right up in the air. Connect it to the lid and have it hanging over the rock where they're basking. I mean, not right on top of them, but within a few inches of where they can bask. Right. Always bearing in mind that if you've got a few terrapins, one will climb on top of the other, and if 3 or 4 can get up to touch it, then make it a bit higher. Quite a selection here. Gourmet's lunch. Prawns. There's a whole prawns.
It's a grand lunch, isn't it?
Yes. The reason being, I usually break off the head because that's got quite dangerous spiky bits there. Yeah. But then the rest I break into sections like that and feed it like that because this part is full of calcium and that's very necessary for the growth of the shell and the bones. So I would feed whole prawns like that, broken into pieces for the small terrapins, but for the larger ones, the ones we'll see in a minute, they can take these whole. Whitebait, which is quite a starter delicacy in a restaurant. They're actually what they are is just whole fish. Now the benefit of this is this is very like what they would eat in the wild because living in muddy sort of streams and ponds, they would eat small fish, aquatic snails, tadpoles, water insects, all the creepy crawlies you see in ponds. So this is very much like what they'd get in the wild, so I'd feed quite a lot of those. And then...
Where would you get those from?
Those you can get in a freezer centre, just in a pack, a pound pack, and you put them in the freezer compartment of the fridge or in your ordinary freezer, and just a few at a time. And they last for ages. Initially it might sound quite expensive, but they do last a long time.
Right.
And of course terrapins only need to be fed, the young ones need to be fed daily, but as they get older, the frequency becomes less and less.
Okay, well we'll see the different sizes in a minute.
Yes.
Pellets.
That's just pond pellets. Literally you go to the pet shop and ask for a tub of pond pellets or trout pellets. All the same, they've got a mixture of vitamins and green food in there, and they're quite good because they float on the top for a while and they can sort of take them easily without it messing the water up too much. Then in here we've got some worms. They're small worms, these, because I didn't dig too deep this morning, but all sizes of worms, very good food. Excellent source of protein.
It's a different mixture, isn't it?
Oh yes, definitely. Yes, this is the side you wouldn't want for your tea.
What's
That's chickweed, just gathered from the field and washed.
Yes.
And they just sort of play about with that and eat bits off it, like they would do pondweed in a natural pond. Yeah. And that's lettuce, good old lettuce, floating on the top, and they eat some of that. And then here we've got a vitamin supplement, a powder, with vitamins and calcium added in. It's a preparation that you can get in pet shops.
Right. How much would that cost?
Oh, it varies. You can get a very small tin, and I don't know, it's quite a while since I bought it because I buy mine in very big tins and the price increases that rapidly. But I shouldn't imagine that it'd be more than 50 pence, and it lasts an awful long time. All you've got to do is, once the terrapins get used to doing the feed by hand, you take one of the little fish, put it like that, as though you were battering it to fry, and then just pop it in, and they won't take it all, but they'll get some down. Yeah. And that's the main thing. And again, cuttlefish bone. This is the sort of thing that you put in a budgie cage, the ordinary thing. If you've got big terrapins, you can float that on the water, and they will actually bite lumps out of it.
So you can leave it like that?
Yes, yes, just like that on the top of the tank.
And that's called cuttlefish bone?
Cuttlefish bone. It is an animal. It goes about that long, and it's the shell of an animal. Washed up on the seashore, you can quite often find them. But I wouldn't recommend to use the ones that you find on the beach because they could have come into contact with pollution. So buy the ones that are in the pet shop and you know that they're okay. And for the tiny terrapins, you can just slice little pieces off and float them.
So that all adds to the nourishment, does it?
Yes, it all promotes healthy growth of bone and shell. You see, because with a terrapin, our bones are all on the inside and they're protected by lots of skin and flesh and everything. The terrapin, it's the other way around, it's all on the outside. So it's very important that is hard and healthy and growing properly without being distorted. And the best sign of a healthy terrapin is a nice smooth shell that's grown out you know, in a regular pattern.
Yeah, so that's about it for food, is it really?
Yes, again,
Just keeping it
if you're
a nice
out fishing
variety.
with your net in the pond and you get a few snails or anything like that in, you know, give them the snails. They'll love them. They crunch the shells, and it's a bit gruesome, but it's very good for your terrapins.
Right, and what about keeping the terrapins clean and healthy?
Well, the main thing about feeding all this kind of thing is that it's terribly messy. A terrapin will take hold of a piece of prawn, it will get it in its mouth and pull off the rest, and all bits go into the water.
Yeah.
And very soon, because the water's warm, it becomes foul. And you don't have to see it to know, you can smell it, it's straight away. So the main thing is to keep the water clean. Change it often if you're in a tank or in a pond. This pond has a drain in the bottom so that the sediment settles to the bottom. I can lift the plug, let it flow away and top up with fresh water. But in a tank it's quite easy to siphon out and change a bit of the water when it's not too bad, and all of the water when it gets a bit too bad. And also there are quite a number of filter systems now that you can buy for tropical aquarium in the pet shop again, that are very, very powerful and quite strong, and for just a small tank with a couple of young terrapins in, that would work quite well.
And what sort of tank do we keep them in? A big tank, a small tank?
As big as you can possibly afford, because they will
Really?
grow to the space that's available. If they feel cramped in a tiny tank, they will become stunted. And once they're stunted, once they stop growing in a normal pace, you'll never catch up again. There'll always be an undernourished, underfed, under sort of sized terrapin.
I suppose the terrapins you see in the home are only very small ones, aren't they? But I know you've got a very big one over there. How do you get them to grow so big?
Well, just exactly what we've been talking about. If you can keep the temperature up, the right variety of food, and an adequate supply of sunlight, there's no reason why anybody shouldn't go into a normal pet shop, buy a hatchling that big, and end up with one as big as this.
Oh, look at the size of him. He's massive. I don't know her.
Yes, and she
Never
gets
seen one
quite
that big
angry if you
before.
get it wrong. Yes,
So it's just looking after them properly, and they'll all grow to that size, will they?
Well, yes, if you give them a big enough container.
So what do you do then? Just feed them the right foods, and as they start to get bigger, then just get a bigger tank.
Yes,
to keep them
expand
in.
with them, yes.
How do we tell that's a female?
Well, the underside of the shell here, it slightly bulges out,
Yeah.
and it has a small tail,
Somewhere.
which is tucked under there, right?
Yeah.
And its claws here are quite short. Now, they may not look short, but when you compare it to a male, which this one is, of the same species.
She's got her mouth wide open. Could you take a nasty...
Oh yes, a very nasty ride.
Watch your fingers, dear.
Right, look at the claws on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Now, those are used in the mating display. They put their arms forward, the arms, their paws, legs, whatever you want to call them, forward, in that position, like that, and vibrate those claws on the face of the female and swim backwards in front of her. And they can keep doing this for hours, and she's totally disinterested. And sometimes she'll be courted by several males at once, and then eventually she decides that she'll give in.
Now, what about looking at some terrapins that are smaller than that are more familiar to me? I mean, I've never seen any of that size before.
What, the pet shop kind?
Yeah, the
little
pet shop
hatchlings,
kind.
Yes. Well, we can compare the size. Actually, we'll take the big one over just to let you see what it looks like. But over there, we've got some tanks with smaller ones in. So, shall we go and have a look?
Wincy, this is the size I'm more familiar with, the pet shop size.
Yeah.
He's after my fingers again.
I know, she'll get you.
Can this one grow to that size?
Of course, they're the same species. There's no reason whatsoever why that one shouldn't end up like this one in about 5 or 6 years' time.
Right.
The main thing is you've got to expand your tank as the terrapin grows. If you keep it in a tiny container, it's going to stunt. So as long as you feed it properly and do all the things that we've talked about and let the accommodation grow with the terrapin, you'll have a monster like this in no time at all.
It's a monster. Well, you've got to watch your fingers. Can I put this one back in the tank?
Yes.
And of course, remember...
To wash your hands.
Right.
It's absolutely critical. I mean, we're laughing about it, but it's very important. Terrapins carry lots of diseases that are transmissible to man. And if you don't wash your hands the instant you've held a terrapin, then you could be in for a lot of trouble. So do it thoroughly.
Right. Wincy, thanks very much indeed. Do you
Thank
want to
you.
put Frida back in a
Yes.
tank before she bites somebody's
Thanks.
fingers up? And I tell you, I think Wincy's told us there's a lot more to looking after terrapins than most people think. Well, that's it for this week, but we'll be meeting Wincy again a little bit later on in the series when she'll be telling us how to look after tortoises. But I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.